Hey everyone, it's Rob, and welcome to the Leading with Genuine Care pod. I'm so grateful you've joined in today to listen in on my chat with Rajesh Kasturirangan. Rajesh is the co-founder and CEO of Socratus. It's a new organization that seeks to be the midwife of collective wisdom. Socrates uses data, design, and viscerality to bring together communities to solve wicked problems. Rajesh has his Ph.D. in cognitive science from MIT, so he's a pretty sharp dude. He's really working on big ideas, big ideas that can change our society for the better, bringing us closer together. We discuss the idea of public problem solving, participatory citizenship, the mental health crisis that is beginning to emerge and come into our consciousness during this COVID pandemic, and the Wood Wide Web. Not the World Wide Web, the Wood Wide Web. And so here's Rajesh. Rajesh, good to see you today.
Oh, great to see you, Rob.
How are things in Boston?
I wouldn't know because I only venture from my home to my yard, but it looks like things are better than in some other places.
Okay.
I am enjoying this time of the year.
Yeah.
It's lovely weather. I bike every day, so
good.
Can't complain.
Good. So you get out a bit.
Yeah.
There's so much I want to talk to you about today with the work and that you do and some of the background.
Mm-hmm.
You have a newsletter, and I'm going to butcher the name of it, but is it Ranganaut?
Ranganaut. So it's my last name. Yeah, it's like astronaut married to my last name.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
And you wrote a piece on it titled Participatory Citizenship.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about what that was about and where you're coming from.
All right. I will give you the long version, and you should just interrupt me whenever you feel like I'm going on forever.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's bringing a lot of my life together into one piece. When you think about citizenship today and politics and elections and democracy, it's really something that we take for granted, right? Like you go to the election booth on a Tuesday in November and you cast your vote and you don't think about how all of this is orchestrated. But actually it was mathematicians and scientists and others in the late 18th century after the French Revolution that actually set these institutions in place, right? Like how do you actually get people to govern a country together? And so I feel like with the kind of complex world we are in today, we need to bring back some of that geeky enthusiasm into politics and into how we are living in a world that is, I think, more complex than our current institutions are capable of handling. Mm-hmm. And so participatory citizenship is how do you get citizens to treat each other as peers and not as subjects of Big Brother somewhere else.
Yeah. Okay. Right? And so what are some of your ideas around that?
So one of the things is how can you use technology in a fruitful manner, right? And that goes back to the French Revolution idea, not the chopping off heads.
Well, I'm curious about the French Revolution and the technology part too.
Right, but
Where does that
for
play
example, like mathematicians like Condorcet after the French Revolutions, they set up institutions like how do you pick the number of jurors in a trial, right? Like how do you have a jury of citizens and not of the lords and the high and the mighty, right? And so that's a very important democratic exercise. And so I'm thinking, how can policy, so participatory citizenship is really, if I had to govern, especially small local neighborhood level or even municipality level decision making, why not have it be done by citizens themselves? right? Like how do you develop the kind of, it's like civics on steroids.
So in a democracy where we can vote in representatives so we don't have to necessarily come together in that participatory way. What's different there? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know about your representative, but I have encountered my fair share of not so stellar representatives.
I'm sure we've all had that experience to a certain extent. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like, especially today, in most democracies, if you're a rep, you're constantly trying to raise funds. I mean, that's your job.
Yeah.
You're not, and your primary, you could say, stakeholders are the people who gave you money. And this is true in the West. This is true in India. It's true everywhere else. And my question is, how can that change? And that can change by devolving power. But you can't devolve power without responsibility, right? Like, I mean, if you give me power, but I don't know what to do with it, and I'm just winging it, then it's not okay. And so citizens should have the skill sets that go with the power that's coming to them.
And how do they learn these skill sets?
I can only speculate at this stage, right? I mean, but that's the kind of like, I feel like what's happening after COVID in many, many parts of the world, and how people have set up like almost instantaneously associations for relief. So for example, in Belmont, where I live, if I just walk down my street, maybe a couple of 100 yards, there'll be a poster that says, if you need a handmade mask, or if you need financial support, or you need somebody to bring you food, call this number, right? And so they have these everywhere. They have actually, I think, dedicated phone lines operated by citizen volunteers who are taking their time from whatever else they're doing to provide these kinds of public goods. Right? These are citizen services. And I think that that's a great model, which is sort of self-organized, but then to the next level.
Yeah. And that, really fits into what we talk about here about, how can we all lead with genuine care each and every day, kind of show up for each other in, simple and maybe not so simple ways. Now, you have a nonprofit that you started called Socrates. And can you share the purpose behind what you're doing and then maybe a couple of the projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So Socrates started because we felt that wisdom is one of the key kind of ingredients in collective problem solving, right? That if you are a little bit wiser, maybe not that much, just a tiny bit, a little bit wiser, we will be better at coming up with solutions that everybody can agree on. And the name, Socrates, the Greek philosopher, said he was the midwife of wisdom. So he himself was not wise, according to him, right? But in conversation with him, wisdom arose in the interlocutor, whoever that was, right? So he was the midwife. And incidentally, he was the son of a midwife. Right.
It's a good fact. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what we see is that we are in a world where collective problem solving is important. Individuals can only go so far. And I'm not a huge fan of the hero version of history, right? I think collectives are better for the problems that we face in the future. So Socrates sees itself as the midwife of collective wisdom, right? So the us. And the big project that we started from, we call it Green Up. So the idea is like a Green New Deal, but for India, which did not have a New Deal, so there can't be a Green New Deal. So we said, India is going to be the most populous country on earth in the middle of whatever climate change is going to do, right? And so can we imagine a future in which India will flourish, not just eke out, kind of a miserable existence, but can we actually flourish in this era? And what do we need for that to happen? And can we do that, really ambitiously, instead of going, replicating the history of industrial civilization and then emitting tons of carbon and then trying to capture that back, why not think of an alternative route right away? So that's our big project.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And what are some of the things that you're doing to make that happen?
Oh, I mean, we're exploring quite a few different things. So to give you an example, it's a very particular thing, but I think it's quite illustrative. So India for a long time has been giving out large amounts of money as subsidy to fertilizer manufacturers, right? Because we are an agrarian economy. Most Indians are still tied to the land in some way or the other. And so we give out $10 billion a year in subsidies to the fertilizer industry. And most of that is for urea, and urea has a huge carbon footprint. And so you can imagine if that money was used for some other purpose. So you could just give that money directly to farmers. You could give that money to, encourage ecologically sustainable practices.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one sort of large amount of money that today the government doesn't have. In fact, no government has that kind of money because we're all struggling from what's going to happen with COVID. So can we use this opportunity to recast that subsidy and use it for something else?
You mentioned urea.
Urea.
And what is that?
Urea is the fertilizer.
That's the fertilizer. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I'm with you now. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so the money is going to the fertilizer companies but not to the farmers.
So the way it works is I, as a farmer, buy a subsidized, tons worth of urea or some other fertilizer. And then the fertilizer company goes to the government at the end of the year and says, here's how much we have lost as a result of, selling it at a fixed and low price. Mm-hmm. And so they will then get a bill from the government.
I see. Yeah. And then if I was a farmer and I received that funding directly, how would that change things for me?
We actually don't know, right?
Okay.
So for example, meaning that's one of the things to pilot. Like let's say that you took a district and you gave everybody the money directly mm-hmm. rather than indirectly through the subsidy. What mm-hmm. will they do with it? How will they spend it? Will they spend it on their kids' education, maybe on health, maybe on different kinds of capital investments? Mm-hmm. Now that fertilizer is not the only thing you could buy with it.
Right.
Yeah, we don't know.
Interesting. You have a process that you use where you bring together collective wisdom?
Yeah, there are a couple of different processes that we have explored. Mm-hmm. COVID has kind of made us think on our feet.
A lot of us.
Yeah, but where we started about a year ago was with something called a wicked sprint. And a wicked sprint is again a hybrid term. So in Silicon Valley circles, people use design sprints to quickly thrash out a product idea, right? So you spend a week with your colleagues and say, okay, here's this app that I'm going to build, and it's all done from start to finish in a week. And so what we are saying is take a wicked problem like this fertilizer subsidy recasting, bring everybody together in a room, and in a week's time, you go from learning each other's perspectives, aligning, not necessarily agreeing, but aligning, committing to smaller subgroups that have specific policy or other decisions that they want to take forward, make a promise towards that commitment, and then leave and do that wherever you go. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's our process.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you solved or worked on problems using the process?
We have. So we have done 2 so far. One online recently on urban mobility. So again, what we are saying is there's a lot of expertise. So we are not the experts. We are the midwives. So there are experts in all aspects of urban transport. Right, so it could be public transportation, it could be footpaths, it could be traffic flow. Bring them together and see if we can imagine the future of mobility in India, mm-hmm. right? And so that we did that early June, in fact, almost exactly a month ago. Okay. And so that is one kind of problem that we have done. in the physical wicked sprint that we did a year ago, it was also on farming. So food systems is a big thing for us because what we think is climate change will be solved by transforming, current systems that use a lot of carbon, but also are implicated in, millions and hundreds of millions of people's lives. So, so food systems are a good example. And we said, is there a way for farmers to capture more of the value that the food system brings? And so doubling farmer income is one of the goals, stated goals of the current government of India. So,
it is?
Yes. Yeah. And so what we said is, what would a dignified income for farmers look like? And what do we need to do to get there? So that was our first wicked sprint.
And is the government receptive to your ideas? I mean, is there a process around that?
Again, because we are midwives, we typically work with people who have the capacity to bring the right players into the room. And that could be government, that could be business, that could be civil society. And in the food systems farmer income dialogue, we had a wonderful partner in an organization called BKS. Broadly speaking, so Bharatiya Krishak Samaj, which translates as Indian Farmers Society, right? And the leader of BKS, Ajay Virjakar, was the person who brought many of the players to the table, including government, senior government representatives.
We spoke a week or so ago, and you were sharing with me about the migrant challenge that's happening, and some thoughts around how technology might be useful in that situation. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is very early stages, right? Most of the really important relief work right now is being done by hundreds and thousands of people who are just directly engaging with the beleaguered populations. So they could be migrants, they could be farmers, they could be women. But what we want to find out is there a way in this participatory citizenship model of helping migrants occupy full citizenship, right? So they're not just recipients of charity. They're not just subjects who are treated poorly. They have a full voice in the affairs of the country. And so one way that technology can play a role, in which we are definitely building, is through essentially peer-to-peer cash transfers, right? So I send money to you. And if there's a way to say that, look, here are people in this area, migrants, who have lost X, and there's a way to verify that, then a donor might say, I will support you for 6 months or a year, right? And it's not a huge amount of money. It's just enough to tide over the worst kind of circumstances. So that kind of peer-to-peer platforms are very popular now. And what we're saying is, can we use that for this particular purpose? So that's one. The second is, can we use media technology in a kind of grassroots way, right? So can we help citizens and migrants in this particular case tell their own stories? So document their lived reality and not just, what might be called the mainstream media's reality.
Yeah.
Right?
A couple of things I want to clarify. First of all, can you share the migrant problem that's happening right now?
Yeah. So, India, like many countries, it's a large country with, more industrialization and wealth in some parts of the country and less so in others. And so what's happened is that migrants typically from North and East India have traveled west and south for jobs. In the construction industry, that's a huge, but all in many service sector industries too, right? Restaurants. And so when the COVID lockdown started, so India had the most severe lockdown in the world starting March 23rd, right? And it went on for a long time, and it's still only partially revoked. And when those jobs dried up, they didn't have a place to stay and they did not have income. So many migrants decided that they were going to move back to where they came from. But how? Right? Because the trains weren't running, and they're definitely not rich enough to fly. And anyway, the planes were not flying either.
Mm-hmm.
So many migrants decided to just walk back. People have walked for days in many occasions.
Wow.
Yeah. And so some of those stories are the stories that we want to tell. But of course, it's, the economic challenges where they are now haven't gone away. So then the question is, once the economy opens up, how will they come back, and what assurances can be given that they will be taken care of? So all these challenges remain.
Mm-hmm. So when they have the opportunity to share their story, how do they do that? And who are they sharing it with?
We primarily see it as a peer-to-peer effort, just like the funding platform. So their biggest audience should be other migrants, right? So if I create one, everybody uses WhatsApp now, right? And so the simplest way to share those stories would be to distribute them in WhatsApp networks. But secondarily, it'll be directed at decision makers and influencers.
Mm-hmm. And so migrants have access to the technology. They have it on them.
Smartphones are, I mean, not every migrant has a smartphone, but enough do. And of course, in the worst case scenario, we could just distribute 100 smartphones, right, to relevant people. But I think that finding enough migrants, so it's more their time and energy that's the scarce resource and not the access to the phone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You wrote about something you called the COVID column.
Yeah.
Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Can you share these 4 aspects to it?
Yeah.
And actually, if you wouldn't mind, describe what a column is.
So column is so it's a South Indian, you could say, craft form, right? And what people, typically women, but others too, will go outside their homes in the morning and use rice flour to create this beautiful pattern. And it's not that different from the kind of Tibetan mandala kind of patterns. In fact, I think it's the same idea. And in fact, it's based on the same kind of religious culture too, right? And so kolam is that kind of drawing and it's because it's made out of flour, it vanishes throughout the day, and by the end of the day, it's gone, right? So every single morning, you will sweep the floor and sprinkle it with water, and then make a kolam on top of it. And so I was just trying to think, what are the 4 different things that you would need in a COVID response scenario, right? So one, which is obvious, is immediate relief, and that's happening. Then 2 kinds of care services, I would say. One is, you could say, mental health, which is severely underreported. I read somewhere, and I don't know what the statistics would be in India, but in the US, I believe that about a month and a half ago already, something like 34% of American citizens were reporting, some kinds of anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a huge mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So how do you provide support for that? And then, of course, there's the physical health. I mean, it is, after all, infectious disease, right? And so how do you provide health services and care services? Then there's the strategy and the planning, which is now it's clear it's going to last for a while. Maybe there will be a virus and we will stop thinking about it, but I wouldn't count on it. So which means that if this is with us for a year or 2, we need systems that can plan for economic vitality while also being very careful about exposure. So how do you do that at a global scale? And then the 4th, which in some ways is my favorite, which is, how do we use this time as a time for new thinking and new opportunities. So how do you imagine alternative futures that you just could not like, are there portals that are opening up as a result of this crisis that would not have been acceptable before? And if so, how do you seed them with the right ideas? So I call the speculative end. So these are the 4 poles or the 4 quadrants.
You are a cognitive scientist. And I want to talk a little bit about the mind right now. And you talked about the anxiety that many people are feeling. What is happening to us right now in our mind, scientifically, if you could speak to that in simplistic terms that we can understand?
I mean, I'm not a mental health professional, so I should not speak in that way. But it certainly seems like 2 kinds of things are happening. One is that, we are causal creatures, right? We want explanations, and we want to attribute whatever is happening to us to identifiable causes. That could be, rogue research in a lab in China, which, or it could be, poor health systems in the United States. Everybody feels like there's
what's the reason?
What's the reason? And I find that sometimes in complex systems, that's a bad question to ask, because there might be too many. Like you may be too attached to the specific reason that your political or social sympathies are likely to support, right? And so I'm seeing that a lot, which is a simplification of the problem. And that leads, and of course, a simple way to get rid of anxiety is to say, okay, that's the real challenge, right? And maybe we need, and I'm just making this up on the spot, but we need a kind of collective meditation, right? Like something that says that, look, this anxiety is real, and that we need ways of digesting it and not brushing it under the carpet.
If we did something like that, what are some techniques or some things that we can either think about or work on or put out there, or whatever the case might be?
Right. I mean, I'm thinking that, we're all spending time on Zoom. I mean, at least I am. And I bet almost everybody listening to this podcast is going to be doing that too.
Yeah.
I feel like we need well-organized online, almost relay meditations, right? Like a space that you can always go to, and there will be a kind of wisdom presencing meditation exercise, and you can just join that for 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 2 hours, whatever you think is that, right? So that this is just constantly available, and it's like a public resource. I can imagine. I think that creating those kinds of online spaces now is technically easy. It's the design and the thoughtfulness that's the hard problem.
Are you in favor, or do you think tools like these apps that are out there and things of that nature? And
you mean like Headspace kind of apps, or?
Yeah.
I do think yes, but they tend to individualize the meditator. And I actually think community is perhaps the most important thing right now. And so, not that Headspace or some other app like that couldn't arrange for a collective version. But I think also the kind of guided meditations you need might be specific to our circumstance, right? And I do think apps have a role to play, but I would say that we need to also build new spaces, and maybe more public spaces and less private spaces.
There's a conference organizer there's a conference each year called Wisdom 2.0. And I know the first name of the organizer is Soren. I can't remember his last name, but he organized with John Kabat-Zinn, who's the creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction. I don't know if it's still going on, but it was a daily meditation that I think there were there were a good number of people. It was a very large community that was tuning into it on one of the platforms. I can't remember
Very
which one
nice.
it was,
Yeah.
but yeah, very specific to what we're going through. So
Yeah.
that conjured up that
Yeah.
thought for me when you
And
mentioned that.
I mean, of course, John Kabat-Zinn, I think, lives only a few, he lives at one end of my bike ride, daily bike ride. Let's put it that way.
So, yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because I know he's in the Boston area, and
Yeah.
like you, MIT alum. So
Yeah.
um,
I think that things like that, and we are still figuring out what planetary meditation might look like, right? I mean, it's never happened before. It's been a dream, right? I mean, if you look at, say, the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, they will say liberation for all sentient beings as their, but in practice, humans did not have the capacity to influence all sentient beings, but now we do.
right.
And so I think that some of these, this COVID crisis could be the spur for some new technologies and new spaces.
Mm-hmm. What about, can you speak to anything you may have studied, and if this isn't your expertise, just let me know. But, sometimes when I'll just say the stories that are happening in our minds become this reality that we start living, and it feels dark and it feels heavy. And not only does it have an effect on us personally in our minds and our physical, but it also has an effect in the energy that we have to those around us. If you can answer this, what is exactly is happening in our minds?
Right. I would say, I would, yeah, let me not, I mean, I have a non-expert opinion, so I think I would better not say.
Oh, okay. That's not a scientific response. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's study that kind of thing. What about this idea, and this can come from anywhere, just your thoughts on these topics, this idea that we are truly interconnected. What does that mean exactly? And how does it show up for us each and every day when we have interactions with each other in person, like this, or maybe even not seeing each other?
Right. I mean, I think that humans are intrinsically social, right? Like, meaning, even when I have a thought in my head, so this may be controversial, but even when I have a thought in my head, I actually have some audience in the background that's presupposed by that thought, right? So that truly private thoughts don't exist, in my view. And in the same way that everything we do, feel, act is against the background of some other. And so interconnection, I think, is built into our, who we are as both as individuals and as a species. And to, take one extreme version of it, the bacteria in our gut are constantly circulating, right? And so, people have found this out, that trees, I don't know if you've heard of the Wood Wide Web.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so the Wood Wide Web are the fungal networks that connect trees to each other.
Okay.
So trees actually, so it turns out that, even sick trees don't die as quickly as you think they would if they were losing access to water and other nutrients. But that's because the various fungal species that connect the roots of these trees actually transport nutrients. So other trees are helping each other stay alive.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that that kind of visceral and actually microbial connection between each other, like, that's the only life we have ever known. And so interconnection, I think, is our intrinsic nature.
Yeah. In some way, I think for some, not everybody, it's kind of overwhelming, just this whole idea of all that. What about this idea, if we could put it in terms that maybe might be a little bit more relatable? Let's talk through the economy, how we're interconnected. how the things that are coming from point A to point B, wherever they might be in the world, were created by somebody
Right.
and moved by somebody, and et cetera. What
Right.
about that aspect of things?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of magical that you can press a button on your computer and something shows up on your doorstep 2 days later.
Right.
Right. But if you trace back all the steps that it took for that, let's say it's something really simple, maybe even a mask, because all of us are buying masks these
Yes.
days.
Yeah.
Oh, everything from the cotton that went to making the fabric, where did that come from? Probably from some part of the world, right? And then it was stitched somewhere else, and then it was transported and stored in a third place. And then finally, there was some requisition that said, go from this warehouse to this final location, right? And I feel like we don't really understand the complexity of the economic system that we have built.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot the exact number, but I believe that humans produce at least 100 million different kind of things.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
We produce 100 million different things, widgets, right? Or
yeah.
whatnots. Yeah.
Right. You can't produce 100 million different things by being isolated.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right. I love the simplicity that you talk about with pressing a button.
Right.
Because, what it does with our minds, at least to me, you know better being a cognitive scientist, but to me, it makes it seem like it just appears. And so, one great practice is to stop and do exactly what you said and start to think through all the aspects, say, of that mask.
Right.
Who touched it? Where did it come from?
Right.
And I believe somebody may have mentioned to me that there are maybe some websites that can help you trace some of the.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, and what's being sourced from where, and who's being paid for, how much. All of those things are available, but still, it's hard work to do that. You can do it once, but every single, especially now when you're buying everything online, I don't think you want a list of sources next to your button.
Yeah.
Most people, right? And that's one of the sort of interesting design questions about the modern economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have deliberately simplified certain interfaces. Now, whether that is, pressing send on a social media app, or whether it is pressing a button on a retail merchant website, like these are things that have been made super easy for us to understand so that we don't have to think.
Yeah.
But it means that all the hard thinking is behind the veil, right? Like
that's right.
And you never know what's hidden there.
That's right. That's right. It's so true. Lastly, I wanted to ask you about, simple things on a day-to-day basis, as it relates to leading with genuine care and what that means to each other, just the simple things, and why that energy does impact, even when you're maybe having a difficult day or you're frustrated with things that are going on in the world, and you go and you grab your mask, because that's the new normal, and you go up to the coffee shop and you can't even maybe go in some cases. They have a window, right. And you're kind of in your head a little bit, in your mind, but your energy to the person who's maybe serving you that day can make a huge difference. That genuine care, that little thing that you do. And what is it about that energy?
Oh, I have a little story. In fact, it just happened today. I was on another call this morning, and we were all asking, the usual thing, like, how are you doing? And one person on that meeting said, "Oh, I'm doing great," right? Like they said it in this kind of such generosity and just natural, like without any artificiality to it.
Yeah.
Right. And it sort of made everybody else's mind space that much better.
Interesting.
Right. And I feel like just that genuine moment that says, I see you and we are in this together.
Yeah, that's so good.
I think that kind of recognition.
Right. It's so good. That's a beautiful way to finish our conversation, Rajesh. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you, Rob. It was a real pleasure.
And to all the loyal listeners, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. And I wish you all much love and gratitude.